You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic. I'm Cameron Lolana.
And I'm Matt Gerasimovich.
And today we're covering Part 1, Chapter 31 of Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, continuing on with Ludmila's, let's call it adventure, dealing with the hospital staff, administration, and burying staff. I don't know whose administration they're under. I'm sure no one cares except for me. Where is your org chart? Show me your org chart. But other than that,
the org chart is a tattered bar napkin with some pen scribbles on it.
Look, if there's one thing I trust for, without question, the Soviet Union to do, it's to have a great org chart.
That's true. That is true.
Yeah, that's something that someone cares about to a degree that no one in American life has ever known.
No.
Like, even people who are really enthusiastic about American companies for org charts don't even understand the basic clerking of the USSR because of the basic necessity of this one person does it and no one else does that. So you need to know who they are because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Yep.
No one else will go out of their way to do it. But anyway,
we'll see if you can track down a clerk to get you an org chart. Might be a little tricky.
Yeah. So Ludmila continues their adventure talking to staff. Is there anywhere in particular that you want to start?
I wanted to start at the end, and then maybe we can work backwards. And sorry, because I get to steal the best line of the chapter, but you can talk about it too. This is one of those just real kind of zingers. I think I don't know exactly when they're used. In this case, it tends to be used as a sort of closing to this short saga that we've gone through together. And Grossman very, very much so backs away, zooms out, and just gives us just this really great two-liner at the end, which is that everyone feels guilty before a mother who has lost her son in a war. Throughout human history, men have tried in vain to justify themselves. And in some ways, this whole book to me feels like Grossman trying to justify that to himself, that it was, this was worth it. This was this was that. But it is easier, I think, to justify it actually on this grand scale. Well, we stopped the Nazis, we did this or that. It's very hard to look at the sort of individual circumstances and kind of to evaluate, right, what a life is worth. And I think that question it still plagues him even in the middle of everything. And it just has a sort of pointlessness as you try to explain it to Ludmila here, as no one is able to do. It just there's hardly any dialogue, really.
Right.
Because what do you have to say? How can you really justify that? It's hard.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's this great line, and I'm about to come for it, but it's from, if you're familiar with, the Soviet side of World War II, you've almost certainly heard this poem before. It's by Olga Bergolts. It's on the massive monument to all the dead in World War II in Petersburg. There is, it's like here, it's the poem, here is the Leningraders, here are the people. And there's at the very end of the poem, all these, the million plus people who died in Leningrad, it says, no one is forgotten and nothing is forgotten. And if you've ever been to any monument, certainly in Russia, probably the same is true in other countries, like post-Soviet countries, you'll see a monument that probably has this phrase in Russian, or, maybe possibly in Russian, possibly in another language. No one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten, typically associated with a wall of names for people who were in this conflict. And that's a great line, but I mean, really, is it true that no one is forgotten, or is it simply this is a name on a roll and you've got no further context unless you happen to know the family? And if there's no family left, and if that story has not been passed on, then is it true that this person isn't forgotten, even if their name is on this monument, and even if that monument is still there? Is it true that they are not forgotten? And I think I can't say for sure that I don't know Grossman's relationship to this poem, but I think you can see here this philosophical relationship to the poem, where there is an idea of glory, an idea of saying this sacrifice was all worth it in order to have this victory we have, or at least if we had to fight this fight, these are the people to give glory to. And Grossman kind of says, well, look at the grieving mothers. Is it? Yeah, sure. No one's forgotten. We write their names down, but what does it mean? how many of these people, and there's another section too here, which to me, like when I'm looking at this, philosophically, I think it's in conversation with that idea where the gravedigger is like thinking about how poor the coffins are that they're burying the soldiers in. And those are only the soldiers who happen to die in a hospital. There are the men who die in field posts who are simply buried together in pits. They're the ones who die out in the field, far away from any medical aid. And they, and the men who died in combat, he thinks, in forests, bogs, gullies, and fields, often found no one to bury them at all, only wind and the snowstorms. So I think there's a broader criticism here of how easy it is to just let it go, even if you have this idea of glorifying the dead. There's the story of the family around them, their friends, and then beyond that, for the most part, history does tend to forget them, does tend to forget those people who die in conflicts in such a fashion.
Yeah, and then the other characters that are here as well, like the commissar. I love this line. Now, however, in front of the mother of the dead lieutenant, the commissar felt himself to blame for the fact that 3 patients had died the day before. Well, and it continues. I didn't have that part underlined, but talking about how he had been, showering, ordering sauerkraut, all this other stuff, drinking some beer. Just again, this links kind of to what I was talking about yesterday, but just the way that we can kind of fall into not understanding the significance of some of the things that we do in our daily life, and the way that these sort of, what I like so much about this book is the way these very epic battles or very epic sacrifices are just so intertwined with just ordering sauerkraut and just taking a shower and just the very basic necessities that kind of go along with all of this. It was just kind of that part's interesting, and it's also just interesting to see how the soldiers, their mentality kind of compartmentalizes a lot of the terrible things that they're seeing.
And all at the same time, too, the kind of unevenness of life. Because on one hand, you have early on, you got these people in the camps, you have the soldiers in the front line, and then you have back on the home front where life, I wouldn't say it goes on as normal, but it's certainly continuing, and certainly people are engaging in, not, I don't want to there's nothing technically wrong with, oh, great, I found like a great piece of some great clothing, I'm going to send it back home to my family. I think anyone can understand that kind of impulse. But then, in the face of this person having this crisis of, why can I get access to these good clothes when this soldier died in this cheap uniform too, of like the sort of unevenness of life and the experiences of the war in this. And it's a whole canvas of experiences wherever you are, civilians on the front line, civilians in kind of the back lines who've been evacuated. And we're just seeing a whole network of life, or whole fabric of life being knitted across these regions. And I think it's interesting to see all these various walks and various experiences of the war, which is, I think, really only captured, tends to be in works like we've covered previously, Svetlana Alexievich, interviewing lots of people and putting their stories down to give you this idea of breaking the mold of this was the war, this was the experience, when in fact there were hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of individual experiences, which are so different, in character.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess to your earlier points, we do forget a lot, and knowing that we're going to forget it becomes even harder to justify it. So that's what this chapter left me with thinking, and we'll move on to something even more depressing following this. It's only down from here, baby. Yeah, you think, could it be sadder? It could. It really could.
It could. Yeah, and we'll get there. But for now, I think that's enough for today. You'll hear back from us again tomorrow if you still feel like just getting that injection of sadness right into your arm. And you will hear from us again soon.